Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness. And Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about narcissism. For me, I think that word gets thrown around a lot lately, so I'm just curious to see what your initial thoughts are, Donovan.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm in the same boat. I feel like it's a word that I've heard very rarely up until I don't know how many years ago, but some number of years ago. And then all of a sudden I started hearing it everywhere and people saying like, this person's a narcissist and I was with a narcissist and all my relationships have been with narcissists and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it's not something that I've spent a ton of time with, but I have to imagine there's some space to be made around like looking at narcissism on a scale as a trait, which is to say like at some point it probably becomes disordered, right? Like at some point it's probably like fairly toxic and hurtful and bad. But I also have to imagine that everyone has some degree of narcissism, like some amount of, and I don't know, maybe you call it something else if it's super low, like you call it humbleness or something if it's way down on the other end of the scale.
Right.
But yeah, those are my initial thoughts. Curious where you're at.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with you that I think like inherently everyone has probably would, when I look at the list of narcissistic traits, I'm sure someone could identify with at least one of them at some point in their life because like as humans, we want to survive. And so, yeah, we are thinking about ourselves and our needs sometimes ahead of others. Not all the time, but I think that's just kind of part of human nature. So it's like, does that make me a narcissist because I was thinking about what I need? Not necessarily, but I think there is like the distinction between like having some narcissistic traits, which I think at some point, the degree, the scale varies from person to person versus like a disorder where they have a higher number of those traits, but it's more severe and more impactful to the people around them and possibly more hurtful. Yeah.
Maybe that's a good place to start drawing the distinction too, because I'm curious how you would characterize the difference between someone being selfish and someone that's a narcissist.
Yeah, well, just kind of like some of I think it's more than just being selfish, because it's like, well, and that's like in the eye of the beholder in some degree, because like me taking like some time off work to recharge and like recover might seem like self-love for me, but to another person, maybe that's like, oh, she's being so selfish by not treating more patients or something like, or refusing to add more patients to her schedule or something to that degree. Yeah, but I think that's selfishness is like potentially a trait of a narcissist, but it doesn't make you a narcissist if you are selfish. You have to have like other things going on. You have to think like, not necessarily, because there's so many traits, like I was looking up the list, like superiority and entitlement, like you feel better than everyone else around you. You're entitled to more. You lack empathy. You lack accepting responsibility for your actions. You demand attention and validation. There's fear. There's potentially anxiety, which I'm like, these are things that like a lot of people have dealt with at some point. But yeah, I think some of that would have to encompass it as well.
Well, I think you touched on a couple pieces that do distinguish narcissism quite a bit. One that stood out to me was sort of this like superiority feeling. That's, and maybe this is why I haven't had as much experience with narcissism, is like some of those traits, especially that if people feel they're better than other people, like that's it. That's the end of me interacting with them and always has been. So that might be why I have like less experience, is because some of these traits are just so unkind to me, or like they just don't mix with me so much that I don't have people like this in my life at all.
Right. Yeah, you don't interact with them. Yeah, and I just actually wanted to put in before we dive a little deeper into this conversation, for those people that are maybe like looking up narcissism on their YouTube search, this comes up for their video. I just want to do a disclaimer that we're not necessarily like well, I mean, I am a trained professional, but I don't specialize in narcissism, so I'm not going to necessarily diagnose a person with narcissism. But that's where you need to go to a professional therapist of some sort to get that diagnosis. This is just our general opinions and thoughts about narcissism. So this isn't necessarily going to be an educational piece. This is more about opinion piece about narcissism. So I just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, where were we before I gave my disclaimer?
Yeah, here's a question that I have, which is, I'd be curious if you have had extensive interactions with someone that you think is a narcissist. Because I can think of a couple, but I have not extensive, right? I can think of a couple, but it's like, yo, I met this person and then immediately I was like, yeah, what the hell? I'm not spending time with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I might have like brushed up against them shortly, but I do, it's interesting because I did, we both studied psychology in our undergrad, but I actually wrote my very first boyfriend, really. I didn't actually define as a narcissist, but I'm like, well, looking back, it probably was. I actually kind of like, based on his traits and behaviors, he was not a good boyfriend. He lied, cheated, lots of bad stuff. I defined him as a sociopath because and I did a lot of research about it, and it just seemed to match up in line. And I'm like, oh, what's the crossover between narcissism and the sociopath? Because from what I learned about a sociopath is like they don't have empathy. They take advantage of others. They literally lack remorse. It's like a thing so they can like manipulate. But they, at the same time, both the narcissist and a sociopath can be very like charming and engaging and attractive to a lot of people. So I don't think it's necessarily for a lot of there's these terms they throw around lately is for narcissism is like, for relationships, is like love bombing, where they shower you with love and compliments off the get-go to kind of draw you in, and then they kind of like turn it against you later and like insult you and make you feel like lower your self-esteem. And obviously that would be unattractive, but I think it can sometimes be so. And there's different types of narcissism. I know there's like overt narcissism versus covert narcissism, so it's not as obvious as like, oh, this person's just obviously super selfish. It's not so apparent. I think there's different layers and different types that can make it harder to identify because they can come off as perfectly normal people from the get-go. Yeah. But I don't know where I was going with that. But I did write my thesis on sociopaths. Yeah.
Well, I feel like just adding on to that, like, there's two kinds of empathy, and I don't remember the actual technical names for them, but one is like cognitive empathy, right? The ability to understand how people might feel. And I feel like a lot of these personalities on this side sort of have that, which is they have the ability to understand what might make people feel good or bad. Mm-hmm. They don't have the other kind of empathy, which is like the more like feeling kind. Again, I can't quite remember the proper terms, but it's like that's how they're able to be so appealing, is like they understand like, oh, if I like show affection or like gifts or whatever else, like I can get this person to like me. The difference is when you no longer are useful to them, you no longer suit their needs, like they don't feel the same like, oh, like I don't want to hurt Dr. Alice's feelings, she's my friend. Like it's just more like okay, I don't give a shit anymore. Like you can't do anything for me, so I don't need to like work on this. So it becomes a much more like calculated and measured thing, which is why it seems so cruel and heartless a lot of the times, is because it is, in a sense, it's just this like calculus of like, okay, this should get this reaction, okay, I no longer need this person, they don't have anything for me, like I'll just move on.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, like where some of the confusion is, because I've heard people get kind of mixed up because they think that these people, because they're able to do things like you're saying, like the love bombing type of stuff, that they also have that second half of like, how could they do that? Like, how could they hurt me so bad and like know and feel bad about it? Well, it's like they don't feel bad about it. That second part doesn't show up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just kind of more so like the love bombing is not necessarily love in itself for you. It's more about like, oh, and this is another common trait of a narcissist is like wanting control. And, the love bombing is a means as controlling you, as like getting you to be vulnerable and sucking you in. And then they gaslight you and make you think that you're crazy. And that's not fun either.
Yeah, and it just goes back to sort of that more like calculating sort of behavior, like they know that these are the things that are effective. And that's part of what I think gets so many people sucked into these things, because you may not see from the outset, like, I only care about myself. Like, I
Right.
have no empathy. What you might see is like, wow, this person's like really thoughtful. They remember this. They brought me this. They like got this other thing and that other thing. But it's like in the worst case of like a business relationship where like
Yeah.
uh they're just giving you stuff to win your business or get money from you, and then like don't care at all anymore. It's the same
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. What are your thoughts? Because about, I think from what I've read that narcissism is not necessarily, well, one, it's like a narcissism or a narcissistic person with the disorder would probably not seek out like mental health support to like help him or her with that situation. So to not improve that situation, do you think they can change? Because I don't, I'm kind of like, well, I feel like there's a lot of people that don't necessarily learn empathy from their childhood, maybe because of trauma or just like it wasn't displayed. And so I think learning empathy and becoming better at it could be a learned trait. But I don't know about narcissism. It's like, okay, can we help a narcissist become a better human being by teaching them empathy? Would they come out of the disorder if you taught them that, if they were willing to learn? That's some like internal questions that I ask myself.
Well, this might be a little bit of a tricky thought experiment, but for me, it becomes more clear in terms of like, if I thought that
Mm-hmm.
I was better than everyone else,
Yeah.
and I had no negative feelings around like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like if I break this promise or whatever, and just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, if I put myself into that like
Mm-hmm.
mindset and that humanity, like, no, I'm not going to look for help or try to get help.
Right.
Like, it just doesn't make sense. Why would you? Like,
I'm so
it's
good at
not
it already.
like I'm better. Well, I'm better than other people, and it's like I
Right.
don't understand why.
Yeah.
Because I've not with narcissism, but with a sociopath, I think the person was.
Mhm.
Like, I watched an interview of the person that was just like, I don't understand what's wrong with everyone else. Like,
Yeah.
it's so easy for me to get what I want
Mhm.
because everyone else is so easy to manipulate, and they don't take advantage of things like I can, and it's really easy. And so like, if you're coming from a mindset like that,
Mhm.
I just don't know. It would never make sense in your head to be like, well, I need to get help so that I can be weak like these other people and everyone can take advantage of me.
Right.
So on the one hand, in the most extreme cases, or like from a baseline, I don't think it's very likely or um, frequent that these sorts of people are going to try to get help. Now, again, with most of the stuff we talk about, it's on a spectrum. So I
Right.
think certain experiences could push people further one direction or another. And I'll
Mhm.
use an example for myself. There was a period of time when I was like going through like dating resources, right? And there were a lot of them with really bad information,
Mhm.
but a lot of them push towards like objectifying
Mhm.
women.
Yeah.
Hopefully this has changed in the past however many years, but I don't know because I haven't been in those circles or read any of that. But like, there was a time where like I had read all that stuff and then was like, okay, let me, because this was back like at the very start of my personal development journey. And I was like, okay, let me see how this stuff feels like, what it looks like, whatever. And so I was exhibiting more traits like that because of like sort of this like learning or whatever.
Yeah.
And then for me, it didn't feel good and it was weird and like the results were not what I was looking for. But I could see how from both sides that could happen, right? So let's say you have some tendency towards narcissism, and then you read some sort of alpha male toxic masculinity bullshit stuff that you're like, oh, like this is the correct thing to do. I need to take advantage of everyone at the maximum that I can, get the most that I can for me, because that makes me alpha or whatever the hell information. Like I could see that pushing you further down that path. But then I could also see you running into some other information around like, I don't know, maybe like personal development or whatever other stuff and pushing you away from it. So super long-winded way of saying I think there are probably some cases where information could help, but in most cases people who have a baseline in these traits are not going to look for help because it doesn't make sense from that mindset.
True. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess they wouldn't seek out help. So it's just more, I guess, for people that, you know, again, like I was saying from the beginning, that generally all of us have some narcissistic traits at some point, maybe all the time, not necessarily all of them, but I think like the difference is that a regular human with narcissistic traits, but not a narcissist, is like not necessarily everyone, but like there's more likely to be open to growth and to learning and to becoming a better human being because they don't necessarily think that they're already above everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it'd be the same as if you're like an ultra elite athlete and it was very easy for you to eat like super bland food to get your exact like nutrition profile. Yeah. And then people are like, oh, you should really try a McDonald's hamburger. You'd be like, what the hell? Like, I don't want to, there's no reason for me to do this. Like,
yeah, why?
I don't need this other stuff. I feel like it'd be the same sort of like mindset. Obviously different example, but yeah, I just don't think it's super likely or frequent that people are going to be looking for help.
Yeah, definitely. Any other, I was going through the list, like what about it's everyone else's fault, not taking responsibility for their actions?
That I feel like can't be
on people.
Well, I feel like I was going to say, I feel like that can't be a personality trait, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like that must be a learned thing.
Yeah.
Because if you do and run around in enough self-development circles, you start learning about like moving to an internal locus of control, like it's and taking more and more accountability and responsibility. So I imagine what it is most narcissists act in a way that they start building that narrative early and naturally and just keep adding on to it. But that, to me, that has to be a learned thing.
Yeah, I think that definitely can develop and change. Trying to see other things that potentially could be like learned or improved if they're willing to. Exaggerated need for attention and validation. Yeah, I'd say that that's something that I think a lot of people learn, especially like people who didn't get a lot of that as a child, I think. And I feel like I'm guilty of like wanting validation sometime, although I feel like I'm better at it compared to when I was in my 20s. So I think that's something that can change over time.
Yeah, I think that is probably one that I don't know, because a couple of things we're talking about, it seems like a lot of people go through this sort of transition over time, right? Like a lot of people when they were younger try to get more attention, and then over time it becomes less and less important.
Yeah.
So I guess it's around like what hits the disordered level, you know, like, and this is sort of a topic switch, but I feel like a lot of people are talking about or thinking about like, how can I make this other person less narcissistic, which is a waste, like almost always going to be a waste of time.
Right.
the more powerful and useful thing is like, how can I change the way that I react to these sorts of things and interact with this person? Because I've personally seen like people asking for help around like, this person's a narcissist. What do I do to change them? It's like, I don't know that that's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's more about like reflecting on if they're truly a narcissist. It's like, one, are we being like quick to judge because they display a few of those traits, or are they like full blown? And is it causing you harm? Or is it because they're not willing to kind of do everything that you want them to do, kind of a thing? So you're calling them a narcissist. So there has to be some self-reflection too, and maybe like identifying the narcissistic traits that you have yourself, which again, like I said, like I think if you look at a list, you'll probably identify with at least one or two, maybe not at this point in time, but maybe at some point in your earlier days, because we're all learning to be better human beings. But also like setting the boundaries, because apparently another common trait of a narcissist is lacking in boundaries. So it's like you really need to have boundaries, and being able to not necessarily be able to, if it's like the roller coaster of love bombing and gaslighting, then you need to set the boundary and say, like, walk away if it's not healthy for you, if it's constantly hurting you. Maybe you get the high of the love bombing, but then the downfall of the gaslighting is just going to be this vicious cycle. And if it doesn't change, it's not going to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think two things to really be aware of, right? There's like one, people make mistakes, stuff happens, whatever.
Yeah.
One thing that I have learned is not really a mistake is like malicious behavior, right? If I see something that is intentionally just like mean, that's not typically like, never have I given people more chances after seeing something like that and been like, okay, cool, they're actually a good person, and they just chose to be like mean one time.
Right.
Or like malicious, I think is a better word.
Yeah.
But that's one to keep an eye out for. And the other one is like, does this relationship feel super transactional? Like, is this person in my corner whenever it suits them and completely gone whenever it doesn't?
Right.
Those two things, at least for me, are like some of the biggest red flags.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. The other one I wanted to touch on, because I think this is also like, I feel like it's changed. It's a generational thing, is that like need to look good, pretty. And like, I think about like the younger generation now, that like, I think social media plays a big role in this, but just as like, I feel like the younger generation, not everyone younger, but I feel like there's a lot more that are caught up in looks and appearance and looking picture perfect for their Instagram. And I'm like, is that like, are they more narcissistic, or is just like the trends of the day and social media?
I would guess that it probably is sort of what I was talking about earlier, which is one of the things that can push you towards narcissism on the scale, because it's so, like you're saying, it's just like so curated, right? In the past, we haven't had as much, like when you have to interact with people face to face all the time, you just don't, like, people still put on false pretenses all the time and try to be their best self or like fake or whatever else.
Right.
But it's harder in person because it's harder to keep up like an act if you're doing an act. Whereas with the social media stuff, you really can curate, a perfect quote unquote appearance. So I think it's definitely a tool that would push people more towards narcissism as opposed to other things, because when you're out in the real world and those cracks show and someone calls you on it, or things don't go the way you expect or whatever else, it automatically confronts sort of this mindset of like, I'm appearing perfect all the time. But yeah, with a lot of social media stuff, that's not necessarily the case. Like, you can go through your feed and be like, every single thing looks perfect. Oh, I made a mistake, it's deleted. Like, so it gives you more of a false sense of being able to like manicure the perfect whatever it is that you want.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it partly comes, like, I think narcissism or narcissistic traits kind of come, like, common things that I see is just like, maybe they didn't have the most stable childhood, maybe there was abuse or trauma, but there's actually underneath narcissism, I think there's a lot of insecurity, which has them be like, well, I've got to have the six-pack abs and be perfectly muscular or perfectly make-upped or however they want. And then that makes them feel good because they're valuing themselves on their appearances and their looks, because they were insecure about them before, so they have to like overcompensate. And then it's like, oh, and then they have the like, well, I'm better than others because I do all these things to make myself look perfect and good. Yeah.
Yeah, I especially if you're getting validation from that, right?
Yeah,
Like, especially when people are like, "Oh, you look good," oh, whatever else. Like, it feeds into that narrative even more and would push you to like do even more of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine you've heard about this, but like, there's tons of articles and stuff about people who do social media stuff professionally and just feel so empty inside because maybe they have less of the baseline narcissism, but they have to basically do the same things of projecting and like perfecting this image out. And I guess if your heart's not in it, like over time that can really wear people down because it's just unfulfilling.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's so manufactured and fake, which is unfortunate because I'm like, but I think that's something, if they develop more security in themselves, it's like, what if you did an Instagram post with no makeup on? Whoa, or no filters. Like that could be freeing for a lot of people, but I don't know if a lot of people are willing to do that.
Well, one of the trippy things is that even that can end up in people's narrative of what they need to do to show up as like, you know what I mean? Yeah, like socially, like social currency, right? And some people do it in a way that like is genuine for them and makes them feel better. But some people, I for sure know because I've talked to people who've done it before, in a way that is like to keep producing this image, and it's interesting and probably not good for your mental health in the vast majority of cases.
Probably not. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Were there any final thoughts you had about narcissism?
I don't think so. Just, I would highlight again to focus if it's something you're struggling with, like, not personally, but you're struggling with someone who has the traits of narcissism. I really look at like what you can do for yourself, because it's unlikely the other person is going to want to change if they're truly a narcissist. So you're going to have the most control over your actions and reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. See you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.